So if you're in the defense and intelligence community, the beneficiary seems obvious. It's the warfighter in the field, or it's an analyst in front of a screen, or it's a cyber operator about to issue an execute command. But it turns out that in the DoD and intelligence community, it's a lot more complicated than that. There's almost always multiple layers and levels of beneficiaries and stakeholders and customers that you need to consider. So other beneficiaries might be the contracting officers, or the requirements writers, or the acquisition folks, or legal, or the people who read the analyst reports, or different levels in the chain of command. On day one, you're more than likely to start with the people you're most familiar with. But as you start talking to these people, you'll realize that they're connected to a much bigger ecosystem. During this process, you're going to have to discover who all they are, because you're also going to discover one other type of user that if you don't know about, your product is never going to be deployed, and that's what we call the saboteur. And the saboteur isn't an adversary, at least an external one, but it's somebody with potential vested interest to make sure your product and service doesn't see the light of day. Is it because it disrupts analysts' work that they've been doing on a continuous basis for the last 15 years? Is it a warfighter who has been traditionally using weapon X or Y, and now you're going to automate that process with robotics or something else? Or is it a prime who has a multi-billion-dollar contract and you're now proposing a swarm of much cheaper products and services? So particularly in the DoD and IC, not only do you need to figure out the stakeholders and beneficiaries, but who are all the people who wouldn't want it? And your goal is not to steamroller them, but to figure out how to actually get them to appreciate what it is you're going to offer. So ultimately, how you deal with saboteurs depends on how large of an obstacle they are and how agile and adroit you are in actually making them partners rather than obstacles. One of the things we're going to do a bit later is to actually build something called the value proposition canvas for each beneficiary and stakeholder, actually describing what's the pain and gain that each one of those stakeholders and beneficiaries you've discovered actually have. And we're going to figure out what is it in something called the value proposition that solves those pains and gains. So next, let's talk about value proposition.